The morning greeted me with the familiar creak of floorboards. The old house on the outskirts of Willows, which I'd renovated myself 30 years ago, had long since become an extension of myself. I rose slowly from the bed, habitually kneading my aching joints. 67 was no joke, especially for a man who'd worked as a painter all his life. After washing my face, I looked in the mirror at my wrinkled face. Gray eyebrows, a stubborn chin, a tenacious look in my blue eyes. The years have not changed my character. I am still as straightforward and stubborn as I was in my youth. My hands, mottled with old paint stains that no solvent could wash off, gave away my profession at a glance. Going down to the kitchen, I put the kettle on and took out a tin of tea. A routine developed from years of loneliness. Ever since my Elizabeth had passed away 5 years ago, every day had started the same way. Tea, toast with jam, newspaper. Sometimes I turned on the radio so the house wouldn't seem so empty. I threw on an old sweater. It was chilly in the house, and I was saving the heating out of habit, and settled down at the kitchen table. It was a table that remembered the best of times when the whole family would gather around it. Elizabeth, me, and our son Percy. Now he rarely came to my parents' house, except when he needed something. Percy. At the thought of my son, I felt a familiar bitterness. Where had I gone wrong in his upbringing? It seemed I had done everything right. I had tried to teach him honesty, hard work, respect for manual labor. But the older he got, the more he drifted away from me and my values. I still remember bringing 12-year-old Percy to my job. I was restoring the old Welsh mansion, one of the wealthiest families in Willows. The work was painstaking, restoring moldings, selecting historic colors, and painting the ceilings. I was proud of the job, and I wanted my son to see that a painter's work was not just a matter of using a roller, but a real art. "Look, Percy," I said, showing him how to create an imitation of marble with special paint techniques. "It's not just painting, it's creating an illusion. People think the walls are made of expensive stone, but it's really just paint and craftsmanship." But Percy looked at me with ill-concealed disappointment. He was more impressed with the homeowner's luxury cars than with my craft. "Dad, how much paint would it take to buy a car like Mr. Welch's?" he asked me that day. I answered honestly, "A lot, son. A lot. Cars like that are not for ordinary painters." "Then I don't want to be a painter," he said. "I'll be rich and live in a house like this." That was the first crack between us. I tried to explain to him that not everything is measured by money, that there is pride in his work, satisfaction from the beauty created, the gratitude of customers. But my words fell into the void. The older Percy got, the more ashamed he became of my profession. As a teenager, he never invited friends over to his house. And when I came to pick him up from school one day in my work van labeled Bambridge, painting and decorating, he pretended he didn't know me and left on foot. "You could have at least changed your clothes," he reproached me later. "Everyone could see you were covered in paint." "I'm working, Percy," I answered then. "I earn money so you can go to this school in decent clothes. My work is nothing to be ashamed of." But he didn't hear, or didn't want to hear. After high school, Percy went to college to study business. I paid for his education by denying myself a lot of things. Elizabeth worked 2 jobs so our son could get a better education than we had. We believed he would appreciate our sacrifices. But Percy came home from college even more alienated. He talked about business strategies, investments, and get-rich-quick opportunities that were foreign to me. My philosophy has always been simple: honest labor, quality work, fair price. I never wanted to get rich. It was enough for me to provide for my family and save a little for my old age. The conflict of values between us was becoming more and more apparent. Percy took a job as an insurance agent, but the work was not bringing him the income he dreamed of. He started investing in dubious schemes, taking out loans, living beyond his means. I tried to warn him, but he only snapped back, "You don't understand anything about the modern world, Dad. Your methods are outdated. Nowadays, money is made out of thin air, not by hunching over with a paintbrush." Our relationship finally soured when he married Octavia. That woman treated me and Elizabeth like second-class citizens from day one. Her ambition and lust for luxury fueled Percy's worst character traits. They bought a house they couldn't afford, a car they couldn't afford, dressed like they were millionaires. When Elizabeth became ill, Percy rarely visited. He always found excuses: work, important meetings, fatigue. At his mother's funeral, he stood stone-faced, and after the ceremony, he left immediately, citing urgent business. Since then, our communication has been reduced to rare calls on holidays and even more rare visits, which usually ended with requests for money, temporary difficulties, a promising project, a profitable investment. Percy always found pretty words for his financial problems. I finished my cooled tea and looked at my hands. Hands that knew how to create beauty out of nothing. Hands that had provided my son with everything he needed. Hands that he deemed unworthy of the handshake of his business associates. After Elizabeth died, I didn't quit working, even though I could have lived on my pension and savings. Work saved me from loneliness and unnecessary thoughts. I took small orders from old clients, painting the veranda, renovating the kitchen, restoring old furniture. People valued my experience and craftsmanship, built by decades of practice. Yesterday, I finished restoring an antique dresser for Mrs. Parker, the widow of a judge. The work is delicate, requiring patience and attention to detail. The mahogany dresser, made in the early 19th century, needed the lacquer finish renewed and lost decorative elements restored. I spent 2 weeks on it, recreating the carved patterns and matching the exact shade of lacquer. The result was worth the effort. The dresser looked as good as new but retained its historical value. Mrs. Parker was delighted. "Horace, you have a golden hand," she said as she examined the dresser. I had no idea it could be restored like that. Her sincere gratitude warmed my heart. It was at times like this that I felt the difference between my attitude toward work and Percy's. For him, work was just a way to make money. For me, it was a source of pride and self-respect. As I thought about it, I picked up my phone to check the time. A missed call from Percy popped up on the screen. This was unusual. My son rarely called in the middle of the week. Usually his calls were on holidays or days when he needed something. I pressed the callback button, and Percy answered almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded strangely strained. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," I answered. "I'm working a little. And you?" "I'm good," he said quickly, too quickly. "Listen, we need to meet. It's important." I felt a familiar tension. Important business in Percy's parlance usually meant financial problems. "What kind of business?" I asked him bluntly. "Not over the phone," he answered evasively. "Octavia and I will be there tomorrow morning, about 10 o'clock. Will you be home?" "I will," I said. "But if you need money again—" "Dad," he interrupted me, "it's not what you think. It's a surprise. For you." "A surprise? From Percy and Octavia?" In all my years, they've never once given me a pleasant surprise. Usually their visits ended with my empty wallet and their promises to pay me back next month, which were never fulfilled. "Okay," I said after a pause. "I'll see you tomorrow at 10. "Great," I could hear the relief in his voice. "See you tomorrow." He disconnected, and I remained sitting with the phone in my hand, thinking about the upcoming meeting. Something in my son's voice made me uneasy. It sounded strange, nervous, guilty. I couldn't quite pinpoint it. Sighing, I put the phone down on the table. Whatever Percy was up to, I'd find out tomorrow. And I still had a lot to do today. I need to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom, finish a sketch for the Abbott family's nursery, and go through the paint cans in the garage. Life goes on despite a difficult relationship with her son. Still, as I cleared the table and went about my daily chores, I couldn't escape an unsettling premonition. Something about the upcoming meeting seemed wrong to me. Very wrong. I woke up earlier than usual. The clock showed only 6 o'clock in the morning, but sleep was not coming. Thoughts of my forthcoming meeting with Percy and Octavia kept me awake. Their sudden desire to see each other, their mysterious surprise, all of it made me instinctively wary. Over the years of dealing with my son and his wife, I had learned to expect a catch. With a heavy sigh, I got out of bed. Since I couldn't sleep, I'd get down to business. The house needed cleaning. Not that I cared much for Octavia's opinion, but my dignity wouldn't allow me to have guests in a mess, even if they were my ungrateful kin. Turning on the radio in the kitchen, I set about cleaning up. The old house was small, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a porch. But it was enough for a lonely retiree. I kept it in good condition, a professional habit. The walls were recently painted a calm gray-blue color. The floor was scraped and covered with matte varnish, and the furniture, though old, was sturdy and well-maintained. As I wiped through the shelves of photographs, I found myself lingering on a picture of Elizabeth, Percy, and me standing in front of the house. Our son was about 8 years old at the time, and he was smiling so genuinely, holding both of our hands. When did it all go wrong? At what point did my son turn into a stranger who only sees me as a source of money? I remembered his last visit 3 months ago. Percy had come alone, without Octavia, which was already unusual. She usually controlled all their financial transactions, including begging me for money. "Dad, I need your help," he began, not even asking how I was doing. "I had an opportunity to invest in a promising business. It's a small coffee shop downtown. The owner is selling it at a reduced price because he needs the money fast. If I don't put down a deposit by the end of the week, someone else will buy it." I listened to him, clearly realizing it was just another scheme. Over the past 5 years, Percy had invested in a car wash, a small bakery, an online clothing store, and some digital assets that I didn't even try to understand. None of these investments made a profit for him. At least, he never paid me back the money he borrowed. "How much do you need?" I asked bluntly, knowing that refusal would lead to a scandal. "10,000 for the deposit," he said, not looking me in the eye. "I'll pay you back in 2 months with interest." 10,000, half of my annual savings. The money I've been saving for illness or other emergencies. "I don't have that kind of money, Percy," I replied. "My pension is small and my orders are fewer. I can give you 1,000 at most." My son's face twisted with disappointment mixed with ill-concealed irritation. "1,000 won't help me," he snapped. "I need 10. "I know you have savings, Dad. Mom always said you save." "That money is for a rainy day," I said firmly. "And judging by the way you're doing business, my rainy day could come very soon." We quarreled. Percy accused me of greed, of not believing in him or supporting his ambitions. He even said that I'd always been a bad father who thought only of himself. If Mom were alive, she would have given me that money, he threw one last time, knowing how much it hurt me to hear it. He left, slamming the door, and I sat in the silence of the empty house, wondering where I'd gone wrong in raising my son. Percy didn't realize that the money Elizabeth and I were saving was earned through hard work. Every dollar was the result of countless hours spent on scaffolding, brush in hand, in heat and cold, weekends and holidays. Returning from memory to reality, I noticed that I was holding the photograph too tightly, risking breaking the glass. Carefully putting the frame back in place, I continued cleaning. I vacuumed the living room, dusted the bookshelves, arranged fresh towels in the bathroom. The house was as clean as it had been when Elizabeth had been alive and kept it in perfect order. When I was done cleaning, I decided to prepare something for the guests. Not that I wanted to spoil them, but a good host always offers a treat. I made a simple apple pie from Elizabeth's recipe. I learned to cook after she died, by trial and error. For the first few months, I ate convenience foods and takeaways, but I quickly realized that it was costly and unhealthy. Gradually, I learned the basic recipes, and now I was doing quite well. As the pie cooled on the windowsill, filling the house with the cozy aroma of cinnamon and baked apples, I suddenly felt a sharp pang of longing for Elizabeth. She loved to bake on weekends, humming along to the radio. Her pies always turned out perfect, with crispy golden crusts and juicy fillings. Mine weren't as pretty, but I tried. The time was approaching 10. I changed into a clean shirt and pants and looked at myself in the mirror. My gray hair neatly combed, my face fresh from shaving. Nothing betrayed my inner tension. At exactly 10 o'clock, there was the sound of a car pulling up. Percy was always punctual, I had to admit. Walking to the window, I watched them park. A brand new SUV that I was sure they couldn't afford. Another credit purchase. Another burden beyond their means. Percy and Octavia got out of the car, talking rapidly. It was obvious from their gestures that they were arguing. Octavia looked annoyed. Percy nervous. When they noticed me watching them, they instantly changed their facial expressions to fake good looks and headed toward the house. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Hi, Dad." Percy smiled strainedly. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "Hello, Horace." Octavia nodded, giving me a critical look around the house. Her on-duty smile never touched her eyes. As impeccably dressed as ever, with perfect makeup and manicure, she looked out of place in my humble abode. "Come on in." I stepped back, letting them inside. "I baked a cake. Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you," Octavia said quickly. "We just had breakfast." We went into the living room and sat down. I in my favorite armchair, they on the sofa opposite. There was an awkward silence. Percy was tapping his fingers nervously on his knee, and Octavia sat unnaturally straight, as if she had swallowed a stick. "So, I broke the silence. You wanted to talk about something important?" Percy and Octavia exchanged quick glances. They seemed to be silently deciding who would start the conversation. "Yes, Dad," Percy said at last, clearing his throat. We've got, well, we have some news." I waited in silence for the rest of the conversation. Experience had taught me not to help them in such conversations, not to suggest words or soften their path. Let them say directly what they need to say. "How are you doing, Dad?" Percy suddenly changed the subject. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied dryly. "I'm all right. I'm working a little." "Are you still coloring?" Octavia couldn't hide the disdain in her voice. "Isn't it hard at your age?" "No," I said. "I'm in good shape. And I don't just paint, Octavia. I restore antique furniture, do decorative murals, restore historic interiors. It's a craft that requires skill and experience." She blushed slightly but remained silent. Percy hastened to smooth over the awkwardness. "Of course, Dad. Your work is very specific. You've always been a master of your craft." His compliment sounded false. In 39 years, I had never once heard my son sincerely recognize the value of my work. "Let's get down to business," I said, tired of their overtures. "Why are you here?" Percy looked as if I'd hit him. He'd always hated my directness, preferring roundabouts and pretty words. "We wanted to talk about the future," he said at last. "Your future, Dad? What's wrong with my future?" I was worried. "Nothing. It's just—" Percy hesitated. "You live alone in this big house. It's hard for you to maintain it." "It's not hard for me," I interrupted. "I'm doing fine." "But you're not getting any younger," Octavia intervened with feigned concern. "Percy and I often think of you, of how alone you are here." I didn't believe a word she said. In all the years, Octavia had never once shown a genuine interest in my welfare. Her concern always had an ulterior motive. "Where are you going with this?" I asked directly. Percy took a deep breath, as if about to dive into cold water. "We think you should consider selling the house and moving to a more compact place, maybe an apartment or a nursing home with good care. So that's what this is about. My house. It's always been about my real estate." "Why would I sell the house I've lived in for 40 years, I asked, feeling anger rising inside. "The house I renovated with my own hands? The house where your mother grew up, Percy?" "To make your life easier," Octavia interjected. "The real estate market is great right now. Houses in this neighborhood are highly valued because of the new traffic interchange. You could get good money and live comfortably." "I'm already well off," I said. "I have a pension, savings, and regular orders. I have enough." "But think about the future," Percy insisted. "What if you get sick? Who's going to look after you? Medical bills could bankrupt you in no time." "I have health insurance," I reminded him, "and I'm not going to get sick yet." They kept pushing, listing all the possible benefits of selling the house and moving. They talked about how I would be unburdened by the big house, how I could enjoy a well-deserved vacation without having to worry about repairs and cleaning, how I would be surrounded by pleasant peers in a nursing home. But I saw right through them. They wanted the money from the sale of my house. They were already mentally dividing that amount, planning how they would spend it on their needs. My needs and feelings didn't matter to them. "No," I said firmly, interrupting their persuasion. "I'm not selling the house. This is my home, and I will stay in it for the rest of my life." Octavia's face contorted with irritation, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Horace, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly well," I interrupted. "You need money. You always do." "It's not about money," Percy exclaimed, but his eyes told a lie. "We care about you, Dad." "If you cared about me," I said quietly but firmly, You wouldn't just visit me when you needed something. You'd ask how I was feeling, not how much you could sell my house for. There was a heavy silence in the room. Percy and Octavia exchanged glances again, more tense this time. Something in their behavior alarmed me even more than usual. They were clearly nervous, and it wasn't just my refusal to sell the house. "There's something else," Percy said at last, pulling an envelope out of his jacket pocket. "Remember what I said about the surprise?" I tensed. Their surprises never made me happy. "What's in the envelope, Percy?" "You'll see." He held it out to me, but he kept it in his hands as if hesitant to give it to me. I could see his fingers trembling, the beads of sweat beating on his forehead. Octavia sat up straighter, if that was even possible, her eyes watching my every move with a kind of predatory scrutiny. "Give me the envelope," I said, holding out my hand. Percy reluctantly handed me the envelope, and I felt that it was heavier than it looked. There was clearly something more substantial inside than just a letter. I opened the envelope slowly, feeling the tension in the room build with every second. Percy swallowed so loudly that I could hear it even through the sound of blood in my ears. Inside the envelope was a thick stack of documents, official papers with stamps and signatures. I began to look through them, and with each page my heart beat faster and faster, and my throat constricted with growing anger and shock. They were loan agreements in my name, contracts I had never heard of and never signed. According to these papers, I had taken out a loan from the bank for $700,000 against the security of my house. I looked up at my son and his wife. They were looking at me with undisguised anxiety, waiting for my reaction. And in that moment, I realized that they had done something far worse than any of their previous antics. They had crossed a line beyond which there could be no forgiveness. As I stared at the documents in my hands, it was as if the world around me had slowed down. A loan agreement for $700,000 made out in my name. A loan I knew nothing about. A loan I had never taken out. My signature was on every page. Well, not my signature, but an imitation of it, similar enough to fool a bank clerk, but I knew I'd never signed those papers. "What is it?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was going on. Percy fidgeted nervously on the couch. His face was blotchy red, a sure sign that he was lying. It was a sign he'd had since he was a kid, when he'd tried to convince me that he hadn't broken the neighbor's window or eaten all the cakes left out for the holiday dinner. "It's the loan papers, Dad," he said, avoiding looking me in the eye. "You have to remember, we discussed this months ago." "We never discussed any loan for $700,000, I cut him off, feeling the anger building up inside. "And I never signed those documents." "You've simply forgotten," Octavia interjected, with feigned concern in her voice. "That was in April, Horace. You agreed to help us with an investment in a country hotel complex. Remember? Percy explained everything, showed us the business plan, and you said it was a good idea." I looked at her, amazed at her chutzpah. I had indeed met Percy in April, but the conversation had been about something else entirely. He asked me for $5,000 to pay off some debts. I gave him $2,000 and never saw the money again. There was no talk of a country estate. "You forged my signature," I said, and it wasn't a question, it was a statement. There was a heavy silence in the room. Percy had gone visibly pale, and Octavia, on the other hand, was flaming with anger. "How dare you accuse us?" she exclaimed. "After all we do for you? And what exactly do you do for me, Octavia?" I didn't raise my voice, but every word was imbued with icy contempt. "Visit me every few months to ask for money? Criticize my home, my work, my lifestyle? Or maybe forging my signature on loan documents? Which of these things should I consider a show of concern?" Percy finally decided to look me in the eye. "Dad, you don't understand," he began in a shaky voice. "We're in a difficult situation." "What kind of situation?" I interrupted. "A situation where you decided to commit fraud using my name?" "We needed money," Percy blurted out. "A lot of money and fast." "For what?" I started going through the documents, studying the details. "For another investment that would be gone in a month? Or have you already gotten into debts you can't repay?" I realized from the look on their faces that I had hit the mark. They'd already spent the money. $700,000 is more than I could ever earn in the rest of my life. It was a good opportunity, Percy said stubbornly. We had invested in a promising business, but there were some complications. What kind of complications? I continued to study the documents, noticing more and more inconsistencies. It doesn't matter, Octavia said. The important thing is that the loan payment must be made on Monday. Otherwise, the bank will start foreclosure proceedings. I froze, rereading the line about the lien. My house. They'd put a lien on my house. The only thing I had left after Elizabeth died. The house I'd renovated with my own hands, where every board, every square inch of paint held a piece of my labor and love. You mortgaged my house? I could barely speak with shock and rage. Technically, you mortgaged your house, Octavia corrected me. Your signature is on the deed. The signature you forged. I raised my voice, which rarely happened to me. We can discuss this endlessly, Octavia said. But the fact remains that you have to make a payment of $35,000 on Monday, or the bank will start foreclosure proceedings. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I needed to think clearly, without giving in to emotion. Over the years, I had learned to read contracts carefully, to pay attention to the fine print, to spot the tricks in the wording. I began to scrutinize the documents more carefully. The first thing I noticed was that the date on the contract did not correspond to the notary's stamp. The contract was supposedly signed on April 15th, but the notarization was dated April 10th. How could the notary certify a document that had not yet been signed? The second discrepancy, my signature differed from page to page. On some it was more sprawling, on others more restrained. A real person cannot sign so differently on the same document. Thirdly, the contract listed my profession as entrepreneur. I have never been an entrepreneur. I have worked all my life as a private painter, and in recent years, as a pensioner taking individual orders. This contract is a forgery, I said, raising my eyes from the documents. And it's pretty crude. The date of signing doesn't match the date of notarization. My signature is different on different pages. I'm listed as a businessman when I never was. Percy and Octavia looked at each other with undisguised concern. They obviously hadn't expected me to scrutinize the document so closely and notice these details. It must have been a technical error, Percy muttered. The bank clerks might have gotten something wrong. Bank clerks don't mix up notarization dates, I said, and they don't list the borrower's arbitrary occupation. It's a forgery, and a rather inept one at that. What's the difference? Octavia suddenly exploded. The important thing is that the money has already been received and spent. And if the payment isn't made on Monday, we'll all be out on the street. All of us? I raised an eyebrow. You live in your own house, Octavia. I'll be the only one on the street if the bank actually takes my house. But that won't happen because I'll prove I never signed those documents. That will take months, if not years, she said dismissively. And Monday is payday. Do you have $35,000? No, I answered honestly. And even if I did, I wouldn't pay off a fraudulent loan. Then you'd have to sell the house. Dash, she exclaimed. Immediately, we've already found a buyer who is willing to pay a good price and complete the transaction quickly. The money from the sale will be used to pay off the loan and the rest for a rented apartment or a nursing home. Now it all makes sense. That's why they were so insistent on selling the house. They needed the money to cover up their fraud, to pay off the debts they'd accumulated by blowing the loan money to smithereens. I won't sell the house, I said firmly. Instead, I'll go to the police and report fraud, forging documents and using my name to get a loan. Octavia's face contorted with rage. Percy turned even paler. You won't do this, he whispered. I am your son, Sibranon, the son who forged his father's signature to get the money? The son who's willing to put a roof over his father's head? I shook my head. No, Percy. A son doesn't do that to his father. You selfish old man, Octavia shouted, always thinking only of yourself. Percy needed help, and you turned him down. What was he supposed to do? Not steal? I suggested with bitter irony. Not commit a crime? Not frame his own father? We didn't steal, Percy objected. We were going to pay the money back when the business was profitable. What business, Percy? I sighed tiredly. Where's that $700,000? What did you buy with it? They looked at each other again, and I realized I wasn't going to hear the truth. Most likely the money had gone to pay off old debts, their wasteful lifestyle, cars, clothes, entertainment. Maybe some of it had been gambled away by Percy, who I knew had a gambling addiction. That's none of your business, Octavia said. It's your business to decide what to do with Monday's payment. You have two options. Either sell the house now or lose it through foreclosure. There is a third option, I said calmly. I go to the police and report fraud on your part. You go to jail for falsifying documents and grand fraud. I'm keeping my house. You won't do that, Percy said, panic in his voice. You wouldn't send your own son to prison. Why not, I asked. You're willing to take away the house I built and repaired with my own hands, the house where I lived with your mother for the best years of our lives. Why should I spare you when you won't spare me? Because I am your son, he shouted, jumping up from the couch. Your blood, your family. Family doesn't do that. I shook my head. Family takes care of each other, supports each other in times of need, respects each other. What you did is not family behavior. It's a betrayal. I rose from my chair, gathering up all the papers. I'll keep these papers, I said. I'll need them for the investigation. Octavia jumped up, her face contorted with anger. Give me the papers, she demanded, holding out her hand. They are not yours. Oh, these documents are definitely mine, I grinned. They have my signature on them, as you claim. Then I have every right to keep them. Horace, be reasonable. Octavia tried to change her tactics, her voice softening, but her eyes remained cold. We're all in the same boat. If you go to the police, everyone will suffer. You lose your son, we lose our freedom, no one wins. I've already lost my son, I said quietly, the moment he decided to forge my signature and foreclose on my house. The son I was raising wouldn't do that. Percy suddenly grabbed his coffee cup that I had offered them at the beginning of the conversation. He jumped up and, in a fit of rage, splashed the hot liquid in my face. You've never been a real father to me, he shouted. Always judging, always thinking you weren't good enough. Never supported my dreams. The hot coffee burned my cheek and neck, but I didn't even cry out. Years of working with paints, solvents, and other chemicals had taught me to tolerate pain. I wiped my face slowly with the sleeve of my shirt, feeling my skin start to burn. So this is it, I said calmly, looking at the son I no longer recognized. This is what you've become. A man who spits coffee in his elderly father's face. Get out, Octavia suddenly shouted, pointing at the door. Get out of this house. It's not yours anymore. I looked at her in bewilderment. Are you suggesting I get out of my own house? This house is mortgaged to the bank, she snapped. It's not yours anymore. If you're not going to pay the loan or sell it, then get out. We'll work it out ourselves. I realized the conversation was over. These people had crossed every possible line. Not only had they committed a crime using my name, but now they were trying to kick me out of my own home. I'm not going anywhere, I said calmly. This is my home, and I will defend my rights in any legal way I can. Then we'll call the police. Octavia took her cell phone out of her purse. We'll say you attacked us. Do whatever you want, I shrugged, gathering the documents into an envelope. I'll wait for the police here, and I'll tell them the truth about your fraud. Percy seemed to begin to realize the hole they'd put themselves in. His face was a mixture of despair and fear. Dad, let's talk calmly. He tried to change his tactics. There must be some way out that will satisfy everyone. The only way out is to admit what you've done, I replied. Give the money back if you still have it, or find a way to pay off the bank. Take responsibility for your actions. We have no money to pay, Octavia shouted. It's all gone to pay our debts. If you just signed those damn papers in April when we asked you to, things would have been different. I shook my head. I would never have signed a loan for $700,000. I would never have mortgaged my house for your ventures. And you knew that, so you decided to forge my signature. Enough! Octavia grabbed Percy's arm. We're leaving. And you're going to regret it, Horace. You're going to regret it. They flew out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a framed photograph fell from the wall. I picked it up. It was a picture of Elizabeth and me holding the newborn Percy. The glass cracked, drawing a line between me and my son. Symbolic. I carefully placed the photograph on the shelf and sat back in the chair, feeling the adrenaline slowly recede, giving way to fatigue and pain. My cheek burned from the burn. My heart ached from the betrayal. What now? I knew I had to act fast. I needed to contact a lawyer, file a police report, notify the bank of the fraud. But first I decided to call my old friend Leon Price, who had once worked as a lawyer but was now retired. He could give me some sound advice. I dialed his number, but before I could explain anything, there was a knock at the door. A sharp, demanding knock. An official knock. "Leon, I'll call you back," I said, and hung up. As I walked to the door, I saw through the window a police car outside my house. Two uniformed officers stood on the porch. The expressions on their faces didn't bode well. I opened the door, trying to look calm, though I felt a twinge of foreboding inside. "Mr. Bambridge? Horace Bambridge?" asked an older officer, a stocky man with a tired look. "Yes, that's me," I confirmed. "Officer Daniels, Willows Police Department," he introduced himself, showing his badge. "And this is Officer Riley. We received a domestic violence report at this address." I grinned bitterly. Octavia hadn't been kidding. They'd really called the police and accused me of assault. "May I know who filed the report?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Percy Bambridge, your son," Officer Daniels replied. "He claims that you attacked him and his wife when they came to visit you." "That's an interesting interpretation of events," I said, pointing to my burned cheek. "Do you think I did this to myself?" The officers looked at each other. "What happened to your face, sir?" Officer Riley asked, a young man with an attentive gaze. "My son threw hot coffee in my face," I replied, "after I refused to participate in their fraud scheme." "Scam?" Daniels interjected. "Yes." I pointed to the envelope of papers I was still holding. "They forged my signature on the loan documents and got $700,000 by mortgaging my house. Now they're demanding that I sell the house to cover their debts." The officers exchanged glances again, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "Mr. Bambridge, we need you to come down to the station with us for a statement," Daniel said. "Your son and his wife are already there, and they have a very different version of events." "I don't doubt it," I sighed. "Let me get my papers and phone, and I'll go with you." As I gathered the necessary things, I mentally prepared myself for a long and difficult trial. I didn't know how it would end, but I was sure of one thing. I wouldn't let Percy and Octavia manipulate and use me anymore, even if I had to go against my own son to do it. The Willows police station was exactly as I'd pictured it. Gray walls, bright fluorescent lighting, the smell of coffee and disinfectant. I was led into a small interrogation room, a simple table, 3 chairs, and a mirror on the wall that I was sure was one way. Officer Daniels motioned for me to sit down and brought me a glass of water. His partner, Officer Riley, sat down across from me with a notepad, ready to write down the statement. "Mr. Bambridge," Daniels began, turning on the recorder, "tell us what happened in your house today." I took a deep breath and began to recount everything in order. The call from Percy the day before, his arrival with Octavia, the surprise of the $700,000 loan agreement, my refusal to participate in their scheme, the coffee thrown in my face. "Do you have these documents?" Daniels asked when I was done. I took the papers out of the envelope and spread them out on the table. "There's a loan agreement with First National Bank, a loan application, and real estate collateral documents. All supposedly signed by me on April 15th of this year. But I never signed any of these documents. They're forgeries." The officers scrutinized the papers. Riley made notes in his notebook. "You pointed out the inconsistencies in the documents," Daniel said. "Can you show them to us?" I pointed out the dates, the difference in signatures, the incorrect information about my profession. "Besides, I have never visited this bank or met a loan officer named—" I looked at the paperwork, James Hodges. "I don't even know where this bank is located." "Dash Bridgeport," Riley said. "About an hour from here." That explained why they'd chosen a bank in a different city. Less chance of anyone recognizing me. "Your son and his wife claim you agreed to take out this loan back in April," Daniel said. "They say you signed all the documents yourself, and now you're trying to renege." "That's a lie," I said firmly. "I would never agree to mortgage my house for their dubious investment, and I can prove I didn't sign those documents." "How?" Riley was interested. "First of all, I wasn't in Willows on April 15th. I was traveling to Portland for the annual restoration materials show. I have tickets, hotel bills, photos with the date and time. I physically couldn't be at the bank in Bridgeport that day. That was my trump card. I didn't tell Percy and Octavia about it when they showed me the documents, deciding to hold that fact for the police. Secondly, I continued, I never call myself an entrepreneur. I am a painting and decorating contractor, now retired. It's on all my official documents, including my tax returns. And third, I pointed to the signatures. This is not my handwriting. I can provide samples of my real signature from other documents. Bank statements, contracts with clients, tax forms. It's easy for an expert to spot a forgery. Daniels wrote it all down and nodded. We'll check your word, Mr. Bambridge. If it checks out, a fraud case will be filed. But I must warn you, such investigations can take a long time. What will happen to my house? I asked, feeling the tension twisting in my stomach. If the payment is not made on Monday, the bank will start foreclosure proceedings. We'll contact the bank and notify them of possible fraud, Riley said. Usually in these cases, all procedures are suspended until the investigation is complete. I calmed down a little, but I still felt shattered. At 67, I found myself embroiled in a criminal investigation, and against my own son. Mr. Bambridge, Daniels looked at me sympathetically. We need to ask you a few more questions about your son's statement. I nodded, preparing for the worst. Percy Bambridge claims that you threatened him with physical violence, the officer said, that you grabbed him by the collar and pushed him against the wall when he refused to take his papers. I grinned bitterly. That's absurd. I didn't touch him. He splashed coffee in my face, and then he and Octavia ran out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a photograph fell off the wall. Do you have any witnesses who could corroborate your story? Riley asked. No, I admitted. I live alone. But I have a coffee burn on my face. Isn't that proof? It proves that you were doused with coffee, Daniel said carefully, but not the circumstances under which it happened. Theoretically, you could have attacked your son and he used whatever was at hand in self-defense. I shook my head, realizing how cleverly Percy and Octavia had thought this through. Word against word, and now I was at a disadvantage, an older man accusing a young couple of fraud and assault. Could I call my lawyer, I asked, realizing I needed professional help. Sure. Daniel slid the phone toward me. You have the right to legal advice. I dialed the number of Arthur Weiland, an old friend I'd known since high school. Arthur was a lawyer, specializing in civil cases. And even though he was 5 years older than me and long retired, I knew he wouldn't say no to help. Arthur? This is Horace Bambridge. I'm in trouble. I'm at the Willows police station. Arthur, to his credit, didn't ask too many questions over the phone. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Don't say anything until I get there. I hung up the phone and told the officers that my lawyer would be there soon. They nodded and offered me coffee, which I declined. Even the smell of coffee now made me uncomfortable. Arthur arrived even faster than promised. Despite his 72 years, he looked trim and energetic. His gray hair neatly combed, his suit impeccable, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. Horace! He shook my hand and immediately noticed the burn on my face. What happened? I briefly explained the situation and showed him my papers. Arthur listened carefully, studied the papers, asked a few clarifying questions, and turned to the officers. Gentlemen, he said with professional confidence, I'd like to speak to my client alone, if you don't mind. The officers left the room and Arthur got straight to the point. The situation is serious, Horace. Your son and his wife have committed felony forgery and grand fraud. But they're trying to beat you to the punch with a countercharge of assault. I didn't touch him, I repeated. I swear, Arthur. I believe you, he nodded. But we need proof. You said you were in Portland on April 15th. Do you still have proof of that? Yeah, at home. Tickets, hotel bills, pictures from the exhibit. All dated. That's great. That'll be our big selling point. Now for the real stuff, we need to get you released today. They can't hold you without charging you, and they don't have enough evidence. Arthur called the officers back and began the conversation in his trademark manner. Polite but firm. Chewy. Officer Daniels, my client is willing to cooperate fully with the investigation, but we insist that the assault charges are unfounded and unsubstantiated. Mr. Bambridge has no criminal record, a respected member of the community, a retired man with an impeccable reputation. We demand his immediate release." Daniels looked at Riley and nodded. "We had no intention of detaining Mr. Bambridge, Mr. Wayland. We just wanted his statement. He's free to go." "Good," Arthur gathered up his papers. "And I insist that you take a statement of fraud and forgery from my client. It's a serious offense, and we expect the Willows police to treat it accordingly." Arthur and I spent the next 2 hours putting together the official statement, listing all the facts of the fraud, detailing the discrepancies in the documents, mentioning my alibi for the day of the alleged signing. When everything was ready and the statement was officially accepted, Arthur led me to the exit of the station. In the hallway, we ran into Percy and Octavia, who had obviously just finished giving their statements. Our gazes met, and I saw in my son's eyes a mixture of fear, anger, and shame. For a moment, I thought that somewhere deep inside, Percy realized how low he had fallen. But the moment passed, and his face was hard and hostile again. "You'll regret this," Octavia hissed as we passed them. "We'll still get what we need." Arthur gripped my hand tighter, not letting me answer. We walked out of the station and got into his car. "Ignore them," he said, starting the engine. "They're panicking, and that's a good sign. The more nervous they get, the more mistakes they'll make." "What now, Arthur?" I asked, feeling incredibly tired. This day had sucked all the energy out of me. "Now we go to your house, gather all the evidence of your stay in Portland on April 15, and prepare for the next step. I will contact the bank and notify them of the possible fraud. That should put a hold on any foreclosure action." On the way home, Arthur questioned me about Percy and Octavia, about their financial situation, about possible motives. I told him everything I knew: their tendency to live beyond their means, their constant requests for money, their suspicions that Percy had a gambling problem. "It's a classic case," Arthur sighed. "A young couple who want to live like millionaires without having a proper income. They get into debt, then look for quick fixes, and end up crossing the legal line." "I never thought my own son was capable of such a thing," I admitted. "Where did I go wrong in his upbringing, Arthur?" "Don't blame yourself." He gave me a sympathetic look. "You were a good father. I remember how you worked overtime to pay for his college, how you and Elizabeth saved every dime to give him everything he needed. Sometimes kids just choose the wrong path, despite our best efforts." His words comforted me a little, but the pain of betrayal was still sharp and deep. When we pulled up to my house, I immediately noticed something was wrong. An unfamiliar van was parked in front of the house, and there were things lying on my lawn books, clothes, some boxes. "What the hell?" I muttered, jumping out of the car before Arthur had fully stopped. I rushed to the front door and found that the lock had been changed. My key didn't fit. Through the window, I saw 2 men moving furniture in the living room. "Hey!" I banged on the door. "What are you doing in my house?" One of the men came to the door but didn't open it. "Excuse me, sir, but we have orders to vacate this house for the new owners," he said through the door. "What new owners?" I shouted. "This is my house. I'm Horace Bambridge, the owner of this house." "We have deeds from Mr. Percy Bambridge and First National Bank," the man replied. "According to them, the bank owns the house because of the default on the loan." Arthur walked over to me, holding the phone. "I'm calling the police," he said. "This is an illegal eviction." While we waited for the police, I watched in impotent rage as the workers took my belongings out of the house and threw them carelessly onto the lawn. Furniture I had restored with my own hands. Books Elizabeth and I had collected over the years. Photo albums, tools, clothes, everything that made up my life was unceremoniously thrown out of the house. "They have no right," Arthur said, trying to reassure me. "Even if the loan were real, the eviction process takes months and requires a court order. What they're doing is against the law." But his words did little to comfort me. I could see my belongings lying on the ground. The rain that had begun to drizzle would wet my books and photos, the neighbors passing by looking curiously at what was happening. The humiliation was total. Finally, the police arrived. The same officers, Daniels and Riley. They looked surprised to see me again, and even more surprised when they saw the state of my yard. "What's going on here?" Daniels asked, approaching us. Arthur immediately took charge of the situation. "Illegal eviction, officer. These people," he pointed to the workers, "have changed the locks and are throwing my client's belongings out onto the street without any court order or notice." Daniels frowned and walked over to the van where the foreman of the workers was standing. Dash May. I see your papers, sir. The foreman held out a folder of papers to him. Daniels looked through them and shook his head. It's not an eviction order, he said. It's just a letter from the bank and a contract for your company's services, signed by Percy Bambridge. You have no right to evict a man on the basis of those documents. But Mr. Bambridge said the bank owns the house now, replied the foreman, confused. He paid us in advance to clear the house as soon as possible. Mr. Percy Bambridge is not the owner of the house, Daniel said. The owner is Horace Bambridge, and he's standing right here, and it's under investigation right now for possible loan agreement fraud. The foreman turned pale, realizing that he had been dragged into an illegal action. We didn't know, he mumbled. We were told it was a legal eviction. Stop the work immediately, Daniels ordered, and get all the stuff back in the house. What about the locks? Riley asked. They'd already changed them. Daniels turned to the foreman. Do you have the new keys? Yes. The foreman pulled out a bunch of keys. We were supposed to give them to Mr. Percy Bambridge this evening. Now you will give them to the real owner of the house, said Daniels, and put everything back where it belongs. And mind you, if Mr. Horace Bambridge finds anything damaged or missing, you'll have to answer for it. For the next 2 hours, we watched as the workers, now much more carefully, took my things back into the house. I checked every box, every item, making sure nothing was missing or damaged. Fortunately, the rain had not been heavy, and most things hadn't had time to get wet. But the very feeling of trespassing, of invading my personal space, was unbearable. My home, my sanctuary, my fortress, all of it had been desecrated by the actions of my own son. Horace Arthur approached me as the last of my belongings were brought back in. You can't stay here tonight. Percy knows the eviction failed and may try something else. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, feeling helpless for the first time in years. To my place, Arthur said firmly. I have a big house, lots of spare rooms. Stay until we solve this problem, and tomorrow morning we'll start acting. We'll contact the bank, file a petition with the court, hire an expert graphologist to analyze the signatures. I knew he was right. It wasn't safe to stay in the house. Percy and Octavia had already shown what they could do, and I had no doubt they would try something else. With a heavy heart, I gathered the essentials. Clothes, medicine, documents, pictures of Elizabeth. I had the keys to the new locks now, but I didn't feel like my home was safe. Officers Daniels and Riley wrote down all the details of the incident and promised to include this in the fraud case. We will increase patrols in your neighborhood, Mr. Bambridge, Daniels said, and if you see anything suspicious, call right away. I thanked them and got into Arthur's car. As we drove away from the house, I looked back at it. The house where I'd lived for 40 years, where I'd raised my son, where I'd been happy with Elizabeth. Now it looked alien and hostile, as if it too had betrayed me as my own son had. We'll get your house back, Horace, Arthur said, catching my eye, and we will bring Percy and Octavia to justice. I promise. I nodded, unable to find the words. I was struggling inside. Anger, pain, disappointment, fear for the future. But somewhere deep inside, a resolve was building. I won't let them take away everything I've built with my own hands. I will fight to the end. Mornings in someone else's house always feel strange. I woke up in Arthur's guest bedroom, and for the first few seconds, I didn't realize where I was. The ceiling was higher than in my bedroom, the curtains darker, and the bed much softer. Then the memories of yesterday came flooding back, and I felt a heaviness in my chest. My son had betrayed me. My home had nearly been taken away. My life had been turned upside down in one day. I struggled to get out of bed, feeling my joints aching. At my age, stress echoed in every cell of my body. After I showered and dressed in the spare clothes I'd brought from home, I went down to the kitchen where Arthur was preparing breakfast. Good morning, he said, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. How did you sleep? Honestly, terrible, I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. All night I'd been thinking about how we'd gotten to this point. Arthur nodded understandingly and sat down across from me. I have some news, he said. I've already called First National Bank, explained the situation, said we were filing a fraud report. They've suspended all activity on the loan until the circumstances are clarified. That was good news, but I knew the battle was just beginning. What's next? I asked, sipping my coffee. Next, we need to gather more evidence, Arthur said. Your papers from Portland for April 15th, samples of your real signature, evidence of your financial situation that proves you would never have taken out such a huge loan. Cool. Most of that stuff was left at my house, I sighed, and I'm not even sure if it's safe to go back there. Arthur thought for a moment. You're right. It's better not to take any chances. Percy and Octavia have already shown what they can do. We need a temporary place for you to stay while we sort this out. I have an idea, I said, thinking of Mrs. Parker, the judge's widow for whom I had recently restored an antique chest of drawers. Mrs. Parker had suggested I stay with her when I told her about my son's situation. She has a big house, lives alone, and I think she'd be willing to do it. That's a good idea, Arthur nodded. I know Agatha Parker. She's a wise woman, and, as a judge's widow, she's well-versed in legal matters. Might be a useful counselor. After breakfast, we called on Mrs. Parker. She was fortunately at home and readily agreed to receive me. Horace, dear, I'm so upset about what happened, she said in her melodious voice. Of course you must come. I have a lovely guest room, and I'd be glad of the company. Arthur and I stopped by the police station first to get an update on the investigation. Officer Daniels said that they had contacted the bank and had obtained copies of all the loan documents, including surveillance videos from the branch where the loan was allegedly made. This was good news. The tapes should show that I wasn't there. We then drove carefully to my house. I quickly gathered all the necessary documents: tickets to Portland, hotel bills, dated photographs from the exhibition, samples of my signature from various official papers, tax returns showing my modest income, which would not allow me to service such a huge loan. After that, Arthur took me to Mrs. Parker's house. Her house was in a quiet neighborhood in Willows, surrounded by a well-kept garden. The Victorian mansion, which had retained its grandeur from the late 19th century, was exactly as I remembered it, elegant, with many antique details that Mrs. Parker had carefully preserved. Agatha Parker met us on the doorstep, a slender woman of 73, with silver hair in a neat bun and lively brown eyes that shone with a keen intelligence. Horace, Arthur, come in, she smiled warmly. I've made tea. We went into the spacious living room, where the chest of drawers I had recently restored occupied a place of honor against the wall. Mrs. Parker noticed my glance and smiled. Everyone admires your work, Horace. No one believes that this dresser is over 200 years old. I felt a surge of pride in spite of all the trouble. My work, my craft, was something no one could take away from me. We sat down to tea and I told Mrs. Parker all the details of the situation with Percy and Octavia. She listened attentively, at times asking pointed questions that betrayed her legal experience, acquired during her years of marriage to the judge. It's a serious crime, she said when I finished. Forgery, fraud, attempted illegal eviction. Your son and his wife could get real jail time. I don't want Percy to go to jail, I admitted. Despite everything he's done, he's still my son. I just want to protect my home and make them realize that they can't do this. I understand, Mrs. Parker nodded, but the law is the law. Perhaps, though, if they fully admit their guilt and make amends, the court will be more lenient. Arthur, who had been going over the documents I'd gathered all this time, looked up. We need more information about Percy and Octavia's financial situation. Where did the $700,000 go? If we can trace the money, it will be further proof of their guilt. I have an idea, said Mrs. Parker. My nephew works at the Willows tax office. He can't give us confidential information, but he can tell us where to look. And we also need a witness, I added. Someone who can confirm that Percy has a gambling problem or other financial difficulties. I can help with that, Mrs. Parker offered unexpectedly. Our senior citizens club has several regulars at the Golden Horseshoe Casino in Bridgeport. If your son really is a gambler, they might have seen him. The plan began to take shape. We decided to divide up the tasks. Arthur would handle the legal side of the case, file all the necessary paperwork for court, and keep the pressure on the bank. Mrs. Parker would talk to her contacts at the club and contact her nephew at the IRS. And I decided to reach out to my old colleague, Noah Turner, whose son Liam worked for the Bridgeport Police Department. Noah had been my partner years ago when we worked together on the restoration of historic buildings in downtown Willows. He was a talented painter, specializing in gilding and decorative techniques. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, but kept in touch through occasional phone calls and Christmas cards. I called him right after our meeting with Arthur and Mrs. Parker. Noah was shocked by my story and immediately offered his help. "Liam's in the economic crime unit now," he said. "If your son and his wife have been running some kind of scam in Bridgeport, chances are their names have been in the police reports before." "I don't want to put your son at risk," I said. "He shouldn't have to break the rules for me." "He won't break the rules," Noah assured me. "He'll just see if there are any open cases or complaints related to Percy and Octavia. It's a standard check." We agreed to meet the next day. Noah was going to bring his son so we could discuss things in person. That evening, after Arthur left, Mrs. Parker and I sat in her cozy library. She showed me old photo albums and told me about her husband, Judge Parker, who was known for his integrity and fairness. "You know, Horace," she said, closing the album, "my George saw a lot of family tragedies in his 40 years on the bench. He always said that the bitterest conflicts are between the closest people." "That's true," I sighed. "No one can hurt as deeply as one's own child." "But George also believed in redemption," she continued. "He believed that people were capable of realizing their mistakes and changing. Perhaps this experience will be a lesson for your son." I wanted to believe that, but I had my doubts. Percy had shown his selfishness and irresponsibility many times before. Would this shock be a turning point, or would it only increase his bitterness? The next morning, Mrs. Parker and I had breakfast together, and I noted how comfortable I felt in her company. She was an educated, interesting conversationalist, with a fine sense of humor and a great deal of life experience. Her presence had a calming effect on me, helping to distract me from heavy thoughts about my son's betrayal. After breakfast, Arthur arrived with news. "I've hired an expert graphologist," he said. "She has already received samples of your real signature and copies of signatures from loan documents. Preliminarily, she says the differences are obvious, even to a layman." "That's good," I nodded. "What about the bank?" "They're cooperating," Arthur said. "They provided all the documents and video recordings. The footage showed that the man who identified himself as you looked much younger. He wore a hat and dark glasses, but his build was very similar to Percy's." I shook my head, imagining my son masquerading as me to fool the bank tellers. How low he had fallen. In the afternoon, Noah and his son Liam arrived, a young man of 28, in civilian clothes but with the confident manners of a policeman. He immediately gave the impression of a serious and competent professional. "Mr. Bambridge," Liam shook my hand. "Dad told me about your situation. I'm sorry you're going through this." "Thank you, Liam," I replied, "and thank you for agreeing to help." We sat down in Mrs. Parker's library and Liam pulled out his laptop. "I've been doing a little research," he said, "within the law, of course, and I found some interesting facts about your son and his wife." He opened the file and turned the screen so we could all see. "First, Percy Bambridge is on a list of people banned from the Golden Horseshoe Casino in Bridgeport. The reason is unpaid debts and violent behavior. This happened about 6 months ago." I sighed. "So my suspicions about his gambling addiction were confirmed." "Secondly," Liam continued, "Octavia Bambridge was sued civilly by Lux Credit 3 months ago for non-payment on a credit card. The amount owed is $37,000. $37,000 on a credit card, I wondered. What can you buy with that amount of money? According to the statements in the file, Liam looked through the documents, designer clothes, jewelry, furniture, electronics, a classic case of living beyond your means. But that's not all, Liam moved on to the next file. I've discovered that your son and his wife have taken out loans from 5 different banks in the last 2 years. The total amount is about $300,000. All of these loans were in their names, and most of them are now in default. I was shocked. $300,000 plus the $700,000 they had gotten using my name was a colossal amount of money. $1 million in debt. Where could all that money have gone? I asked, not believing my ears. Some of it went to buy a house and a car they couldn't afford, Liam answered. Some of it probably went to Percy's gambling debts. But there was something else interesting. He opened another file. 2 weeks before the loan was made in your name, Percy and Octavia transferred a large sum of money, $150,000, to the account of one Victor Donovan. Who is Victor Donovan? Arthur asked. He's a well-known moneylender in certain circles, Liam answered. He lends money at high interest rates to people who've been turned down by banks, and he has his own methods of collecting debts, if you know what I mean. Now the picture was starting to come together. Percy had fallen into debt to a dangerous man, and he needed the money to pay it off. So they went to such desperate lengths as forging my signature and getting a loan in my name. Maybe it was the threats from this Donovan guy that made them act so desperate, Noah suggested. They feared for their lives. That doesn't justify their actions, Arthur said firmly, but it does explain the motive. At that moment, Mrs. Parker's phone rang. She answered it, and I could tell from her reaction that it was an important call. "Yes, he's here," she said and handed me the receiver. "It's for you, Horace. Officer Daniels." I picked up the phone anxiously. "Mr. Bambridge," Daniels' voice sounded strained. "We have some news. We arrested your son and his wife this morning." Arrested? I was astonished. For what exactly? For loan fraud, for one thing, Daniels said. The bank videos confirmed it was your son in the wig and sunglasses. But there's something else. We found documents in their house showing preparations for another fraud. They were planning to make a second loan in your name at another bank. I sat up, feeling my knees go weak. A second loan? They wouldn't stop until they'd squeezed every last dime out of me. "There's something else," Daniels continued. "In the search, we found drafts of a will with your forged signature, where you supposedly leave all your house and property to Percy. They were preparing the ground in case your, shall we say, premature demise." It took my breath away. Had they gone so far as to consider my death as a way to solve their financial problems? "They're at the station right now," Daniels said, "and they're asking to see you. It's up to you if you want to see them." I paused, thinking about the situation. Part of me wanted to see my son immediately, to ask him to his face how he could do this, how he could betray me so cruelly. The other part couldn't bear the thought of looking him in the eye after everything I'd learned. "I'll think about it," I finally answered. "I'm not ready for a meeting right now. I need to think things through first." "I understand," Daniel said. "Let me know when you've made your decision." I hung up the phone and looked at the people in the room. Arthur, Noah, Liam, Mrs. Parker. They all looked at me with sympathy and support. "Percy and Octavia have been arrested," I said. "They were planning to make another loan in my name, and maybe they had even worse plans." I told them about the forged will, and Mrs. Parker gasped quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. "Horace," Arthur put his hand on my shoulder, "you should know that we're on your side. We're going to help you through this." "Thank you." I struggled to contain my emotions. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust Percy again. "It's too early to think about that now," Mrs. Parker said gently. "The important thing now is to protect your interests and make sure that justice is done." I nodded, feeling strangely relieved. Now that Percy and Octavia had been arrested, the threat to my home and property was much lessened. But the pain of betrayal hadn't gone away. Perhaps it would never completely go away. "What happens next?" I asked Liam. "They'll be formally charged," he answered. "All things considered, it'll be grand fraud, forgery, attempted eviction. There may be other charges when the investigation gets more information. They face a serious sentence," Arthur added, "but if they fully admit their guilt and agree to cooperate with the investigation, perhaps the court will be more lenient." I nodded silently. The thought of my son going to prison was unbearable. But even more unbearable was the thought of what he was planning against me, his father. "I want to go home," I said suddenly. "To my home. Now that they've been arrested, I don't have to fear another eviction attempt." "Are you sure?" Arthur asked. "We don't know yet if they had accomplices." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I won't let them rob me of the security of my own home. It's my home, and I'm going to live there." Mrs. Parker smiled. "I understand you, Horace, but know that my door's always open to you, and not just in times of need." I looked at her gratefully. In that moment, surrounded by the support of true friends, I realized I was not alone. No matter what happened next, I had people I could count on, and that gave me the strength to move on, despite the betrayal of those closest to me. The courtroom was filled to capacity. I was sitting in the front row next to Arthur, clutching a folder of documents that were no longer needed. All the evidence had already been presented to the court. Mrs. Parker sat on the other side of me, her presence giving me strength. The trial was now in its third week. In that time, I had learned more about Percy and Octavia's affairs than I had ever wanted to know. Their financial machinations were far more extensive than we had originally realized. In addition to the fake loan in my name, they had defrauded several other people: Octavia's elderly aunt, Percy's former co-worker, and even several customers of his insurance company. Sentencing was to take place today. Percy and Octavia pleaded guilty, hoping for leniency. Their lawyer tried to portray them as victims of circumstance: Percy's gambling addiction, threats from loan shark Donovan, financial pressure. But the facts spoke for themselves: cold calculation, careful preparation, a complete lack of remorse until the moment of arrest. Percy sat at the defense table with his head down. He had lost a noticeable amount of weight over the weeks, his usually well-groomed hair disheveled and his face gaunt. Octavia sat next to him, keeping her appearance calm, but I could see her fidgeting nervously with the edge of her jacket. In all those weeks, I had never once spoken to them, couldn't bring myself to. Every time I saw them in the courtroom, such a storm of emotion rose up inside that I was afraid I wouldn't be able to contain myself. Anger, frustration, the pain of betrayal, it all mixed into a toxic cocktail that poisoned my soul. Judge Ramirez, a stern, middle-aged woman with a penetrating gaze, entered the room and everyone stood up. She sat down at her desk, reviewed the papers in front of her, and addressed the room. "Please be seated. The court is ready to announce the verdict in the state's case against Percy and Octavia Bambridge." I felt my shoulders tense. Mrs. Parker gently touched my arm, silently supporting me. "Defendants, rise," the judge ordered. Percy and Octavia rose. I noticed my son's hands trembling. "Percy Bambridge and Octavia Bambridge, the jury has found you guilty on all counts of grand fraud, forgery, unlawful eviction, and attempted embezzlement." The judge paused and looked at them over her glasses. Taking into account the gravity of the crimes, aggravating circumstances in the form of using family ties to commit the crime, as well as the presence of other victims, the court sentences you to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 3 years with good behavior. There were whispers in the hall. I sat motionless, trying to comprehend the sentence. 5 years. My son would spend 5 years in prison. Part of me felt satisfaction that justice had been served. The other part of me felt deep sadness that it had come to this. "In addition," the judge continued, "you are required to make full restitution to the victims. In Horace Bambridge's case, that includes repayment of all the proceeds of the fraudulent loan, as well as $50,000 in moral damages." I knew it was unlikely I would ever see that money again. Percy and Octavia were bankrupt, and even after their release, it would take them years to pay off all their debts. "Do the defendants have anything to say before they are taken into custody?" the judge asked. Percy raised his head. His eyes were red with tears. "I would like to," he stammered, trying to control the tremor in his voice. "I wish I could say something to my father." The judge looked at me. "Mr. Bambridge Sr., do you wish to hear the defendant out?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to get up and leave without listening to any excuses, but the other part of me needed some closure, some last word that would put an end to the story. "Yes, Your Honor," I finally answered. The judge nodded to Percy. "You may speak." My son turned to me. Our eyes met for the first time in weeks. "Dad," he began, and his voice trembled. "I know there are no words that can undo what I've done. I betrayed you, betrayed your trust, your love. I was selfish and thought only of myself, my problems, my desires." He paused, trying to deal with his emotions. "I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I realize the gravity of my actions and that I'm sorry. I really am." I stared at him, trying to find in his face the little boy I'd once held in my arms, the one I'd taught to tie his shoelaces, the one I'd read bedtime stories to, that boy for whom I was a hero, not a source of money, but all I saw was a stranger with my son's face. Percy waited for my answer, but I remained silent. What could I say? That I forgive him? That would be a lie. That I hated him? That wouldn't be true either. I felt empty, as if there were a gulf between us that could not be bridged. The judge, seeing my silence, nodded to the escort. "Take the defendants away." Percy and Octavia were led out of the room. My son looked up at the last moment, his eyes searching mine, but I turned away. Not out of cruelty, but because I could not bear the pain that tore at my heart. When the hall emptied, Arthur put a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Horace. You've won." But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a loser in the most important battle of all, the battle for my son's heart and soul. "Let's go home," I said. "I want to go home." Home. How much that word meant to me. My home was saved thanks to Arthur's quick action and the help of the police. The bank had canceled the fraudulent loan, and now I was once again the rightful owner of my home, free of any encumbrances. Arthur drove me to the house, and I stood on the porch, looking at the familiar facade, the neatly trimmed bushes, the swing I'd made years ago for little Percy. Everything looked the same as it had before, but it felt different. It was as if part of the soul of the house had been ripped out, just as part of my soul had been ripped out. "Are you going to be all right?" Arthur asked, looking at me with concern. "I will be," I answered. "I just need some time." "Call me anytime," he said, shaking my hand. "And don't forget, we're expecting you for dinner on Thursday. Margaret will make your favorite apple pie." I nodded gratefully. Arthur and his wife had become a real support to me in recent weeks, as had Mrs. Parker and Noah and his son. I discovered that I had many more friends than I'd realized, people who appreciated me not for my money or possessions, but for who I was. Upon entering the house, I immediately felt its emptiness. Although all my belongings were in place, something was subtly different. Maybe it was just my perception, colored by the bitterness of betrayal. I sat back in my chair and looked at the picture of Elizabeth on the wall. The frame was new. The old one had broken when Percy and Octavia had slammed the door that ill-fated day. "What would you say, Liz?" I asked quietly. "Would you be able to forgive him?" I knew Elizabeth had always been gentler, more forgiving than I was. She saw the good in people even when they gave cause for doubt. Perhaps she would find it in her heart to forgive Percy. But I wasn't sure I could. I spent the next few days putting the house in order. I repainted the walls in the living room, fixed the creaking floorboards in the hallway, replaced the cracked tiles in the bathroom. Physical labor has always helped me cope with emotional turmoil. Working with my hands, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. A week after the trial, I got a call from an old client who owned a small art gallery in downtown Willows. "Horace, I have an unusual favor to ask of you," he said. "We're preparing an exhibition of works by local art restorers. Would you like to present your work? Maybe give a master class on decorative techniques?" I was surprised. I'd never thought of my work as something worthy of an exhibition before. "I'm not a painter, Martin," I replied. "I'm just a painter." "You're not just a painter, Horace," he countered. "You're a master of your craft. The way you've restored the murals in the historic library building, the way you recreate the decorative elements of antique furniture, it's real art, and people need to see it." His words touched me. All my life I have taken pride in my work, but I never expected such recognition. "I'll think about it," I said, not wanting to make a decision right away. "Think about it," Martin agreed. "The exhibition is in 2 months. And Horace, I heard about your situation with your son. I'm sorry." "Thank you," was all I could manage to say. After my conversation with Martin, I went down to the basement where I kept samples of my work and photographs of restoration projects. Going through them, I remembered every order, every challenge, every solution I'd had to find. Here's the Baroque ceiling painting I restored in the old Welsh mansion. Here's the malachite imitation on the columns in the town hall. Here's the gilding on the frames of antique mirrors in the historic Belvedere Hotel. Each work was a part of my life, a testament to my skill, the result of decades of practice and self-improvement. And yes, each was, in its own way, a work of art. Maybe Martin is right. Maybe I've always underestimated the importance of my craft. Percy has always been ashamed of my profession, thought it unworthy. But what if he just didn't understand its true value? I decided to take Martin up on his offer. Not to prove anything to Percy, he would never know about the exhibition, but for my own sake, to finally recognize the significance of my life's work. The next day, I called Mrs. Parker to tell her about Martin's proposal. "It's a wonderful idea, Horace," she exclaimed. "I've always said that your work deserves wider recognition. Will you come to the exhibition?" I asked, surprised at my own audacity. "I would love to," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Why don't we have dinner together beforehand?" I felt a warmth spill over my chest. In my 67 years, I hadn't expected to feel this way again. That after my son's betrayal, I would be able to trust people again, to open up to them. "It would be my pleasure," I replied, smiling for the first time in days. Hanging up the phone, I went back to work on the project I'd started yesterday. Restoration of an antique jewelry box I'd found at the flea market. The jewelry box was in poor condition. Peeling paint, broken hinges, missing decorative elements. But I saw its potential, the beauty hidden beneath layers of time and neglect. As I worked on the box, I reflected on my life, how it had changed in recent weeks. Percy's betrayal had caused a deep wound that might never fully heal. But that wound didn't define the rest of my life. Like that box, my life was more than its damaged parts. It still had beauty, value, and potential for restoration. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Percy. I didn't know if he would want a sincere reconciliation after serving his sentence. But I knew one thing: I would not let his act define my life going forward. I would move forward with the support of true friends, finding fulfillment in my craft, opening myself to new opportunities. 2 weeks after the trial, I received a letter from Percy from prison. The envelope lay on my desk for a day before I found the strength to open it. "Dear Father," he wrote in handwriting I hardly recognized, "I know you will probably throw this letter away without reading it, and I can't blame you for that. But I must try to say what I couldn't express in court. I've made an unforgivable mistake. Actually, not a mistake, a crime. Against you, against our family, against everything you taught me. I was blind in my selfishness, in my greed, in my desire to have more than I deserved. I let Octavia and my own weaknesses push me down a path that led to the destruction of our family. I do not ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I realize the depth of my betrayal, and that every day I will live with that realization and remorse. If you decide to never communicate with me again, I understand. It will be the hardest but deserved punishment for me. But if you ever find it in your heart to at least listen to me, I will be eternally grateful. With love and remorse, your son, Percy." I reread the letter several times, trying to figure out if the words were sincere or just another manipulation. Percy had had a lot of time to think in prison. Perhaps he had truly realized his mistakes. Or maybe he was just looking for a way to make his situation easier, hoping for his father's support for parole. I didn't know, and that uncertainty grated on me. Part of me wanted to believe in his remorse, to find a path to reconciliation. The other part reminded me of the years of manipulation, the cold calculation with which he had betrayed me, the forged will found in his house. In the end, I decided not to answer the letter, at least not yet. I put it in my desk drawer to return to it later, when the pain had subsided a bit, when I could think more clearly. Instead, I focused on preparing for the exhibition. I chose the best examples of my work, mapped out a workshop, and began restoring a few pieces specifically for the exhibit. The work gave me purpose, structure, meaning at a time when I felt I had lost part of my identity as a father. Every morning I woke up with the firm intention of living the day to the fullest. I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo Percy's mistakes or my own in raising him, but I could determine my present and my future. I began to see my friends more often: Arthur and his wife, Noah and his family, Mrs. Parker. I joined an antiques club where my experience as an antique restorer was in great demand. I even agreed to give some lessons to a young man who wanted to learn the basics of wood furniture restoration. Gradually, the pain of betrayal became less acute. It didn't disappear. I doubted it ever would completely. But it became more bearable, like an old wound that hurts in rainy weather, but no longer interferes with life. I realized that Percy's betrayal, for all its bitterness, had also given me unexpected gifts: new clarity in knowing who my true friends were, greater confidence in the value of my craft, freedom from illusions and false obligations. As Mrs. Parker used to say, quoting her late judge husband, "Sometimes we need to lose something valuable to understand the true value of what remains." I didn't know what the future would bring, Whether I would ever be able to rebuild some kind of relationship with Percy. Whether I would want to. But I knew I would live life to the fullest, open to new opportunities, true to my principles, surrounded by people who accept and appreciate me for who I am. On the opening day of the exhibition, standing in Martin's gallery next to the fruits of my labor, I felt a strange peace. People were coming up, looking at my work, asking questions, expressing admiration. Mrs. Parker stood nearby, her hand occasionally touching mine in a gesture of encouragement in something more that was just beginning to form between us. I was Horace Bambridge, a 67-year-old house painter and decorator, a master of his craft. I was a man who had survived betrayal and found the strength to move on. I was a father who loved his son despite everything that had happened, but who also understood that love doesn't always mean trust or intimacy. And in that understanding, there was wisdom, sadness, and beauty, like an old, skillfully restored jewelry box that bears the marks of time but has not lost its value.